Good day, and welcome to the Pritzker Traubert Foundation Chicago Prize Evaluation Panel Training Webinar. Today's call is being recorded. If you are having any technical issues, please use the chat box to relay that. Also, if you have a question at any time, you may also use the chat box. I would now like to turn the conference over to Cindy Moelis. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Chicago Prize Expert Reviewers Training. I'm Cindy Moelis. I'm the president of the Pritzker Traubert Foundation, and many of you were able to join us on Tuesday night, and I just want to say thank you for joining us. It was really a wonderful event, and I hope you felt the same way we did. Someone just mentioned that it was almost like a family reunion, having so many people from who are interested in Chicago and support Chicago around community investment. I said this at the event, but I'm going to say it again. We really appreciate the timing, the fact that you're dedicating your time to help us review. And we want to make sure you stay engaged even after the review process is over. So the purpose of the webinar today is to really go into more depth, to give you an opportunity to learn more about the process and also a little bit about the intention behind the Chicago Prize. So if you haven't already visited the chicagoprize.org website, I'm going to encourage you to do so, not just because your photo is on the review site and you all look fabulous, but also it might answer some additional questions. We're also going to encourage you to ask questions today, and you can do that through the chat box, using the chat box on your screen. So most of you are familiar with our foundation and the mission to increase opportunity for Chicago families. I think some of you know that we created the Chicago Prize to encourage and support neighborhood reinvestment that's driven by the community and the community's vision. And at the end of this process, we will provide one $10 million flexible, no-cost capital to make sure one of these communities' plans is a reality. But I also want to emphasize that this is more than just one investment in one initiative and one collaboration. We have been trying to encourage new collaborations, engage other private and public funders, provide technical support to many of these efforts, and we also want to use the process to continue to learn more about what's happening in Chicago's neighborhoods and what we can do as a city to support these big, bold ideas. So to get this right, we need and appreciate your help. Our goal is to be a good partner to these communities and also to be a good partner to you as well. So here's how the process will work. Once the review window opens, you'll have 3 weeks to review each of your assigned proposals against the 4 criteria that we're going to discuss in a little while. We really need you to complete your review within that time, or the rest of the selection process can't go forward. We also ask that you let us know as soon as possible if you have a conflict with your assigned proposals, and so new ones could be sent very quickly. So in order to launch the competition in April, we were asked by our competition platform partner, Common Pool, to identify only 4 criteria. And I have to tell you, it was really hard to narrow down all the things we were trying to achieve. But we did choose 4, and the 4 we chose will be discussed at length in a little while. They're leverage, impact, feasibility, and community-led collaboration. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't want innovation and innovative projects, but we need everyone to accomplish the 4 criteria first. These criteria are interrelated. Even though you're going to have them as individual items, they're interrelated, interdependent, and they're essential components of effective, impactful community-based development. The highest ranked ideas should be community-driven, have a positive impact, be able to leverage this prize money, and the team that they assemble should be able to get the job done. Your reviews will include numeric scoring and feedback. Your comments will be anonymously shared with the applicants at the end of this process. So we really want to emphasize that one of the really positive impacts we hope to have on the applicants that don't move forward is that they get your feedback and they can build a stronger proposal based on it. After you've completed your review, we'll use your scores to identify the top 15 to advance to our selection committee to be considered for one of 2 awards. At least 4 of these will advance as finalists to Phase 2, where they'll be in competition for the $10 million award. In the meantime, they will each receive $100,000 of general op planning grants with no strings attached and in-kind technical support so they can have a stronger application by the end of the process. The final award will be made in the spring. Others that you read might be identified as our most promising submissions. We're highlighting these other compelling ideas and teams at our announcement events, and we hope to be able to help them also build capacity and find other funding. So a few words about the application you'll be reviewing. We just want you to know we put together this application in a way that wouldn't be too time-consuming or burdensome in the first phase. There was a balancing act that needed to be done. Because we wanted to encourage a lot of organizations to consider applying, we did not require them to do community meetings or pro forma financials. But this means that you may not have all the details that you would have liked to have when you're reviewing. But just know that the applicants that advance to Phase 2 will be asked for much more detail. But for now, it means as you review, we ask that you base your judgment on available information in the application and the criteria that you're going to learn more about. Second, since different communities have different needs and plans, which we all know, we have tried to make the application as open as possible. So you're going to be seeing a lot of very different applications. But we're open to all good ideas. And we've just asked applicants to make the case for why their project is the right investment, in the right neighborhood, with the right team, at the right time. We're asking you to tell us which proposals you find most aligned with the criteria, as well as what's compelling. Third, we want this to be a value-added experience for all participants. So this means that we did not eliminate many applicants during the administrative review process, even when the presentations weren't as polished as we might have hoped. We wanted as many applicants as possible to benefit from your feedback. So you may find differences in quality and encounter an application or two that may not seem as ready for a $10 million infusion. I'm going to thank you in advance for being willing to provide feedback to these teams as well. So thank you again for your support of this process. We know that you're investing your time to ensure positive investment is being made in Chicago. We're also fortunate to have so many smart and talented reviewers and partners that are supporting this process. So we're on this webinar with 3 of those partners, Lever for Change, Common Pool, and Chicago Beyond. Jason, Christabel, and Jordan are on the phone from Common Pool, and this is the firm that oversees the competition platform and will be our guides today to discuss the review process. Liz Dozier, many of you know, who's the CEO at Chicago Beyond and a fellow judge, will help us talk through some issues regarding implicit bias that we should be aware of while reviewing applications. And I'm also joined by Andy Beidman from our shop, from our foundation, who will help answer questions about the criteria. I'm going to turn it over to Jason from Common Pool, who will walk you through the review tool, and then we'll come back and we'll talk to Liz about understanding implicit bias.
Thank you,
Jason?
Cindy, and thank you everyone. Thank you to everyone for your time today. You're currently looking at the landing page for the chicagoprize.org website. We encourage all of our judges to spend some time on this website. We really embrace a very open, transparent, and fair initial process for the applicants. So you can come here and you can see exactly what the application requires. The more you familiarize yourself with the application requirements, the faster and the easier it will be for you to score those applications. But what I'd like to narrow in on is really a section of the website which we call the scoring process. And so if you go to kind of the main menu item, there you can see that there is a drop-down, and you'll see scoring process is one of the menu items you can select. When you click on that, you're going to see 2 options. One is scoring criteria, and the other is a level playing field. I'm going to talk about these 2 internal web pages and encourage you to follow up by looking at them as well. So looking first at the scoring criteria, we've given our applicants access to the actual tool that you're going to be using in order to score each assigned application. Now, there are 4 traits, as Cindy mentioned. Those traits are impactful, feasible, community-led collaboration, and leverage. But while we only have 4 labeled traits within the rubric, you'll see that each of those criteria actually has a much more complex structure to it. And so you'll see first the labeled trait, leverage. Next, you'll see a series of questions, which we call the prompts. And those are intended to clarify the definition of that word leverage. Beneath that, you'll find that there is a scale from 0 to 5. There's a red dot in the middle of that scale. And as you scroll back and forth between these single integer scoring ranges, you're going to see that different pre-populated definitions appear. Now, this is really important because as our applicants start to write the content of their proposal, a lot of them are trying to reverse engineer their process. And so we're kind of revealing how we're defining the upper end of the scoring range for each of the criterion within the trait scoring rubric. And a lot of people find that highly valuable. We hope it also helps you, the judge, because we're kind of telling you what it means to resolve the score, say, perhaps between 3 to 4 for the trait of leverage, right? You'll also find that there are anchor words at the extreme ends of each of these scales. So all of this allows us to weave other themes and to clarify what these labeled traits means within this scoring rubric. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the top of the rubric, and I'm going to read off each of the labels, and then we're going to allow the Pritzker-Traubert Foundation to come in and to clarify any kind of the nuance that is relevant to each of these traits. So the first one is impactful. So Sydney, I'm going to ask you and your team perhaps to clarify or to expand upon each of these traits as we go through the list.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. This is Andy. I'm just going to say a few words on each of these. With respect to impact, we know going into this that community impact is certainly challenging to achieve and challenging to measure and requires a deliberate, forward-looking strategy in any type of project. We also believe going into this work that the folks doing this work in their communities should be the ones deciding what impacts are most important for their communities. And so in the application, we've asked the applicants to tell us what they think they'll achieve and describe for us why it matters. When it comes to reviewing, I think this will make this a particularly challenging criterion to apply. And so we're asking for reviewers to evaluate whether the impacts that applicants are suggesting are ultimately realistic for their project, ambitious, and have the potential to meaningfully affect the surrounding neighborhood. And so I'll just underscore that because of the way we structured these applications, understanding these impacts and thinking about the context will be especially important because there'll be a lot of variation across applications in what we see.
That's great, Andy. Thank you. So our next labeled trait in the rubric is feasible.
So in this instance, the way we've tried to frame this criteria is first with a recognition that development projects, the types of real estate work that we're describing in the Chicago Prize is challenging anywhere, but especially so in the markets that we're describing on the south and west side. And that success in those environments requires often a specialized skill set and a team with specialized expertise. So in this initial application, what we're asking teams to do is put forward a big vision, but also demonstrate that they have the experience and expertise assembled to implement. This means understanding financing, staging, and work streams that will make the project a success, and really being transparent and candid about the risks and barriers that they may encounter. As Cindy mentioned, in Phase 2, we're providing $100,000 planning grants and technical assistance to our finalists to help them strengthen their proposals and provide us with much more detail about these dimensions. And part of what they'll be asked to do in that piece of the process is respond directly to the feasibility challenges that you identify in your review.
Thank you so much, Andy. So the next label trait is community-led collaboration.
So as Cindy mentioned, we think the team is a particularly important element of these proposals. We know and we believe that successful, sustainable, impactful community initiatives are those that are created with, by, and for folks that live and work in the communities where the project will occur. As you read the proposals, we need your insights on initiatives that tell compelling and genuine stories of community engagement and partnership, and which ultimately elevate local perspectives and culture in shaping the initiative's concept and implementation. We also need to know from you where you see risks or red flags, or where a lack of thoughtfulness about how the initiative fits into the surrounding community could jeopardize the success of the work. And we need your insights on which projects show genuine partnership with the community and where the collaboration may be more superficial or transactional. In the next phase, as Cindy mentioned, we'll be asking the finalists to go much more deeply and show us more concretely how the community has been engaged in the project. And again, we'll ask them to explicitly respond to deficiencies or opportunities you identify in your analysis of the proposal.
Okay, and our last labeled trait is leverage.
So for leverage, again, as Cindy mentioned, we are genuinely excited about the impact that $10 million can have for these initiatives, but I think we're also humble about the limitations of these resources relative to the challenges and needs on the south and west side. We have emphasized throughout the Chicago Prize process that a successful application should put forward a thoughtful strategy for how they can use our $10 million in no-strings-attached grant capital to unlock additional resources. As you review proposals, we'll be asking you to assess and report back to us on the ways in which the initiative is using our resources to tap other pools of funding. We are also interested in ways that the application is building on existing efforts and projects underway in the community. We think leverage is so important that in the next phase, we'll be asking finalists to not only respond to your feedback and comments on how they can improve their leverage and capital stack, we'll also be availing hours of sophisticated technical assistance to each team to help them think through these questions in more depth.
That's great, Andy. That's a great segue too, because I have two more points to make. The first of which is that not only are you required as a judge to resolve the score for each of these 4 traits, but you're also required to provide a comment with a minimum of 10 words of content. And so I want all of the judges to know that as we survey people who participate in these competitions, oftentimes your feedback will rank even higher than the opportunity to win a grant. A lot of people enter this process thinking, what are my chances of winning? And if I don't win, what do I get out of this? And your feedback is highly, highly valued. And so while we have prescribed definitions for these single integer ranges across the rubric, you are not confined to that. And you have the liberty to write in your comments whatever you think would be most constructive for the applicant team that you're reviewing. So we encourage you to be constructive in your comments, to be specific in your comments, and to try to think of it through the lens of the team that's put in so much work proposing these projects so that they can maybe take your feedback and tweak the project or think about how they may do it through some other means. So if the first point is focus on feedback, then the next point is focus on fairness. So you've heard us talk about how open this is, you've seen how transparent this is, but we really need to address this notion of fairness. And so if you go back to the menu and you click into a level playing field, we've described to everyone applying that not only are they going to receive scores and comments from 5 of our judges, but also that those scores will be statistically normalized. Now, you see that we've gone through the trouble of explaining this in both technical and layman's terms, but what this really means for someone is that they understand that 5 of you are going to be giving scores and comments, which means that not all the judges are going to be looking at all of the applications, right? And so the question is raised, which is, well, what happens if I get 5 people that are low scores? They're hard graders, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, they only give 1s and 2s, whereas a competitor may be getting 5 easy graders, people that always give 4s and 5s. So what happens is once all of you have completed all of your scores, we then look at 2 measures of distribution across all the judges' scores, mean and standard deviation. And then we go back and we rescale your individual scores to match those distributions. So graphically, you can see how we've described this, and mathematically, you can see how we've described this. But a general explanation would be, if say you were a judge and your maximum score for every application was only a 2.5, right? We're effectively taking that 2.5 number, stretching it out to a 5, and making sure that your scores match against the total distributions across all the judges. Now, this does not mean that you can't score someone low if you think they're low, or you can't score someone high if you think they're high. It just means that within your scoring range, for you in particular, we're stretching that out to match the distributions across all of the judges. So we focus a lot on fairness. We make sure this is a rigorous and thorough process so that the rank order, which comes out of your assessment, is provided to Pritzker-Traubert for further review so that those scores and comments are actually a key part of the decision-making process for who moves on. So with that said, I'm now going to turn over the presentation to Liz Dozier, and she's going to talk to you about implicit bias.
So Jason, before we turn it over to you, to Liz and I, who are going to have a conversation, we do have one question that came up. Could we go back to the other slide before we go to the bias conversation, which is that someone really wanted you to explain what happens when that red dot moves along the line and what pops up in terms of what it was said. I think you went a little too fast, and it might be helpful if you could go back to that just for a minute and just clarify what that meant as they moved along the line.
Sure. That's a great question. So again, remember that everything you're seeing on the screen right now is available to the public. And so what we're saying is that for the trait, say, of impactful, which you can see on your screen right now, we're trying to define what a particular scoring range would mean. So if you keep the red dot at 2.5, we're saying that a score anywhere between 2, and 3 would roughly mean what you see within this purple box, okay? And then the reason that we provided that is so that people can understand really how to write a great application. So as you scroll up, if you take that red dot and move it up to it, somewhere between 3 and 4 or somewhere between 4 and 5, we have this kind of predefined notion of what a score like that would mean. Now, in addition to them understanding what a score like that would mean, they're going to be getting both the score and the comment from our judges. So while it may be that for impactful, a score of 4.5 means a powerful vision for a transformative impact on the community and its residents, a compelling case that approach will successfully lead to lasting positive change on the selected place and beyond, you get a chance to put a finer point on that score through your comments.
Should the judges use those guidelines to use the 3.5 or the 4 or the 4.5, or is that mostly outward facing towards the applicant?
No, absolutely the judges should use that because the applicants have used that. And so this reflects kind of the biases and the preferences that we've expressed to all of the applicants in terms of how we're defining the scores within the range.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have one more question before we move on? No, we're okay. Okay, thank you, Jason. We're going to move on and ask Liz. Many of you know Liz. I just want to thank her again. She gave us a call at some point and talked about how much they have worked on this because Chicago Beyond, her organization, does similar competitions and really has thought through these issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz and thank her again for sharing her wisdom and her experiences.
Thanks, Cindy. So Liz Dozier here from Chicago Beyond, which for those of you who might not know, it's an impact investor that backs the fight for youth equity here in our city. And I guess I'll just begin by saying that we all have bias, which we know. And at Chicago Beyond, we've been taking really seriously the question of, as we think about our own investments, how we make decisions, how our funding works, because we believe that there are practical ways that we at Chicago Beyond, we can just essentially do better. And so, as Cindy mentioned, in the past, Chicago Beyond has done these open calls for transformative funding, and we call ours the Youth Equity Challenge. But before receiving our applications and afterward, we took our judges through a very deliberate process, and we introduced some practices in our process, and we're going to talk through a little bit of them here. But the main point of it was honestly just to ensure that we were checking ourselves, and that we were checking ourselves what we would see and we were conscious of, and also what we were unconscious of. And that was important because ultimately our judges were getting ready to help us make a really big decision that could impact tens of thousands of people in a particular community.
So Liz, you and I got to talk a little bit about before we got on the webinar. And fundamentally, we pick these judges because we believe they have incredible expertise, really good perspective, and bring something to it. So I'm wondering, in making a decision about who to fund, don't we want each judge to bring their individual perspectives to these decisions?
So we do, but we also have to be conscious of, as we're thinking about actively trying to invest in ultimately under-invested communities, as the Chicago Prize is, it's important we understand what bias that we're importing and realizing how that could actually get in the way. So it's important to think about, again, what we're intending to bring, what actually serves for making a really good decision in investing in Chicago communities versus what we're unconsciously bringing that actually cuts against that and honestly doesn't really get us to the best decision in terms of how we think about investing.
So to help us become more conscious of this, can you give us some examples of biases?
Okay, so as you see on your screen, we've got 5 that are up above there, and I'll just start with the first one, just super simple, and it's the beauty bias. And we ultimately in our society associate beauty with success. And there's physical beauty, but from what we saw at Chicago Beyond, it was also in simple things like writing style, grammar, spelling. Like, for example, a judge might unconsciously react to slang in the first paragraph of an application and ultimately, subconsciously have a judgment, and then that ultimately impacts how they rate an applicant. But that actual slang doesn't end up really talking about, or it's not a proxy for the ability of that applicant to bring a community together around capital assets. And so let me just be really clear. The point is not that a truly community-led organization and its application will have either exquisite grammar or patchy grammar. The point here is really being aware of the assumptions that we bring to the table about the likelihood of impact or the feasibility of work based on that beauty.
Okay, makes sense.
There's also the idea of affinity bias, and it's when something reminds us of something that we like, and we ultimately have a greater warmth towards it, we pay more attention to it, and it can also work in the opposite way, and we think of, instead of like beauty biased and the halo, we think of something that we dislike, and it's almost like horns. We have this subconscious reaction. So a quick example of that might be, my, philanthropic organization funds, young people in a certain age range. So when I read an application, if I'm not really conscious of this, I could ultimately give higher scores to an organization that looks just like my organization or has similar things that it's backing.
This is an interesting one because we actually have a place on when you get your reviews, your proposals, we're going to ask you if you are conflicted out, if you've really done work in that community or the individuals. But there is a little bit of this bias when you think about communities that and you've worked in or you've been part of. So it's not that you have to opt out of those, but every reviewer should be thinking, so what am I bringing to this, just knowing North Lawndale or Grand Boulevard or Roseland, both positive and negative.
Absolutely. I think that's really critical of importance. Our third one on the screen is just the halo bias. It's when we identify one great thing in the application, and because we've identified with that one great thing, we feel so good about it, we ultimately discount everything else we might see that might not actually align in ways that we're hoping to have it align, and so it can work in the exact opposite way. The halo can actually be horn. So as a judge, I might see a particular applicant, and I might notice that, okay, they attended this particular school, and then I might say, okay, because they attend this particular school, maybe that applicant is actually stronger. But it's important to note that since the quote-unquote knowledge is required to do the work in the community, it's not typically learned in the classroom. Education credentials might be less important in terms of trying to figure out and measure bringing together community around capital assets. So we all know this. There's no class out there that teaches about the dynamics in a particular community. So the best applicants may have a lot of formal education, or they might have a little. But we've been trained just by our own kind of way of operating in society to believe that we associate different educational credentials with the potential to succeed.
You had mentioned something about our assumptions about who's can be financed based on assumptions. Again, we don't want to stop people from bringing their expertise around finance here, but we just don't want people to make assumptions that aren't part of the application or part of the factual base, right?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here is just us being conscious, I think, and being aware of our own bias. And going into the applications and having that awareness, I think often helps us make better decisions as we're thinking about how that little red dot moves along that continuum. There's also confirmation bias, which is number 4, and we all know this one. We do it all the time, and we subconsciously look for evidence to back up our own opinions. And as a judge, I might believe a certain narrative about communities of color on the West Side, and then I might subconsciously favor applications that confirm that narrative or disfavor applications that challenge it. And the last, but certainly not the least, is our contrast bias. And it's when we compare one community organization application to another community organization we know, and we're subconsciously defining a comparison point that might not be appropriate. So for example, thinking about a smaller community-based organization and then trying to compare it to a larger community-based organization and its ability to articulate its own impact.
That's really, really helpful. By the way, I just want to mention that if people have questions that aren't covered in this, the rest of the half an hour around bias, around other issues, we're going to try to get to all the questions that you post. But if you do have a question about implicit bias that comes up later, Liz has been very generous about saying she'll try to help people work through them. I even think that might be the case if it happens while you're in review session and you want to sort of get support around some of these issues that you've highlighted. So thank you very much for highlighting them. We do have one question about leverage and how it's going to be measured in terms of detail, and I just want to make sure that if we should be going back to Jason's conversation that we do that. But we'll continue to move forward with Jordan's presentation. I do want to say one last thing that, just to reinforce the fact that our goals in the Chicago Prize is to support strong neighborhood investment. It's important that it be open, fair, and transparent. So this conversation about bias has been extremely helpful. So Jordan, I think we're going to turn it over to you, but I don't want to lose Lisa's question about leverage. So if you're able to cover it, that would be great.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. Feel free to jump in and stop me when we get there as well, if I don't think of it when we get to that point. Okay, everyone, just so you know, I'm going to switch over to a sample or test website that we use. So if you see the web address, that is not the web address you'll use to access the site. The most helpful thing for you here is on the review page is that all of the reviews assigned to you for you to complete are all listed right here for you to access. Here in the opening introduction, we list the deadline for the reviewing to be completed, and we also provide an email address that you can use to reach out to us for any questions you have or any trouble, any technical trouble you may have, or anything like that that we can help you with. We'll always be on standby to jump in and give you a hand. For your reviews, you'll have two different tabs here. The first one will be the only one that's populated when you first log in, and that is the Open Reviews tab. So that is a review that you have any open applications in, which means you haven't started it or you started it but haven't completed it. In the Completed Reviews tab, you will see all of the reviews that you have completed. This is also a place where you can go to edit an application that you have already completed. So if there's an application you completed, but you realize there are things you wanted to say differently or want to adjust your scores, you can come over in here, find that review in here, and go in to edit your review. This table format provides you several columns of information, and you can sort this list of reviews using the column titles at the top of the table format. A couple of ways that could be really helpful to you is, one, the last modified column will let you know when you last made any changes to a review. So if you're looking for a particular review that you were working on recently, you can sort by this last modified column by clicking on last modified, and it will tell you in order, kind of the order of applications you've been working on. The other one is the completion status. So as I said, you have reviews that you started, but also the reviews that you haven't started, everything that you haven't completed. In this case, I'm only seeing reviews that I've started because it says continue review. I'm going to click on this to go ahead and sort the other way. So now I have all of the reviews that I haven't started. To begin a review, we have a hopefully very simple process for you to do the review process. So just click Start Review. That will prompt this first page. This page will give you the registration form and the application form for you to be able to review those thoroughly before you begin your scoring. When you do click on those links, they'll open the registration and the application in separate tabs, separate tabs in your browser, which will allow you to leave those open if you would like to while you go through the entire judging process, so that you can click back and forth to do more review as needed. You will not be able to move past this page until you've opened both of those and see that there are check marks next to each one of these. If you do, it will just prompt you that you still need to review that information before you can proceed. We click Next for step number 2. Notice here as we get into step number 2 that you also, if you've exited out of your registration and application forms, we still provide those links here at the top right. So if you ever need to jump back into your registration or application form throughout the process, you can use those links. Here we have the conflict of interest declaration. This gives you the opportunity, if you have an overwhelming or realization that you have a conflict of interest with this particular applicant after reviewing the registration and application, you do have the option of saying, yes, there is a conflict of interest with this submission. What that will do as soon as you click Next is alert you to the fact that you will now be returned to the review screen, and that particular review will be swapped with somebody else's, with one that's assigned to somebody else at the time, so that you don't have to review that particular application. If you select No, then you can just proceed and go through the whole scoring process. Now we'll begin seeing a little bit of what you're familiar with from what we talked about earlier. So we have our scoring trait rubric here with our 4 different scoring traits in each of these tabs. So once you've reviewed the application and you've reviewed the prompt for the scoring trait, maybe even reviewed all of the different scoring range definitions so you understand kind of the full range of what is available for you to score, you can select a score based on the scale and dragging the bubble, very similar to what we showed you on the front end of the website. After that, as Jason spoke to, you'll also need to leave a comment of at least 10 words, 10 words or more, giving feedback to the participant. Once you've done that, you can continue through the application process. Every single one of these application scoring traits will function exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and click through these and make sure that we get those completed so we can show you the rest of the process. Once you've completed all of the scoring trait rubrics, you can then move on to the step number 7, which will give you the opportunity to provide an overall impression of the application. It also provides us with a slight score differentiation if we find ourselves in a situation with any tied scores at the end of the scoring process. To do that, you can drag this scale just to range between 0 and 100 in order to decide what your overall impression was of the application. Once you're done with that, once again, move on to the very last step. On the last step, you can find a score summary that will show you your entire process, all of the scores and feedback that you have provided so far, and give you the opportunity to go back and make changes if you wish. So for impact, feasible, for any of these, you can click this link and it'll take you directly back to that part of the process to be able to make any changes. Once you're done with all of the scoring process, as I've demonstrated, you can click on Save and Exit. Once you do, it'll let you know that this will now end up in your completed reviews, and it will take you back to the review page. I believe at this time, Christabel is going to go ahead and jump in and give us a little bit more details around the timeline and several other items like that. Christabel, are you here?
Wait, before we go on to that, Jordan, we're getting a couple of questions. Is that okay if we just...
Definitely.
So we've gotten a couple of questions of conflict of interest. The conflict of interest we're trying to avoid is if you're really part of an investment, a group that might invest in these collaboratives. For example, if you're a foundation who has a specific interest and knowledge of a community that you would be investing in, that is something you should remove yourself, or if someone close to you is part of that application, or if you have a financial interest in that application. We brought a lot of you on because you know a lot about Chicago and a lot of different communities. So if it's just a knowledge and it's something you feel that you can review objectively, which is really the important part of this, if you can look at that application and not have a personal preference or bias, then we believe that you can read most of the applications, or we wouldn't have put you on the reviewer panel.
And let me just add one more thing. This is Andy. Someone raised a question about who decides whether there's a conflict of interest. As was Jordan just mentioned, we are sort of relying on you as our reviewers to self-select or self-designate if there's a conflict. It'll be the first question you get answered if you are assigned a proposal. And if you feel like you have a conflict, please feel free to indicate as such, and you'll quickly receive another assignment. We have enough reviewers and proposals that we can easily swap folks around if we need to.
And we will put this on the forum website. We will. Me answering this off the top of my head and having Andy comment isn't as helpful as us getting you a very clear definition. So we will do that before you get any applications assigned to you. And we will send it out to the group just so we know everybody has gotten the same definition of conflict of interest.
To be clear, technically speaking, the conflict of interest thing is completely automatic, so there's no need to inform us or try to get us to give you a new review. It will automatically do that in the system.
We also got a question about resending or a request to resend the bias slide. We will do that along with the definition of conflict of interest. And if you want a PDF of your projects, I assume, Jordan, that they can download these at some point and actually print them if they want to. Is that right?
Yes, you should be able to do that right here from this tab, I believe. I might not be correct about that. We will need to confirm that answer for you and get back to you.
And then finally, there was a question about are all comments and scores shared with applicants? I know the comments are shared anonymously. They will not know who their reviewer was, and they will be shared as a group. So all 5 reviews will be shared with them. Could you also mention if the scores will be shared, or is that I don't think the scores are shared because they don't mean very much outside the context of the rankings. Is that right, Jordan? Or Jason?
This is Christabel. I can answer that one. That was part of some of the information I'd like to provide. We will do share scores and comments. They will be anonymous for each application. So they'll have all of that, including the numbers for the scores, so that when they go back to the rubric on the website, if they got a score of 4 for that particular trait, they can remind themselves of what that meant in terms of our scoring range definition.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the scores that they'll get will be the normalized scores, which will be not the same as the raw scores which any judge may resolve in the rubric.
We also got a question on how many applications each reviewer will be asked to review. As part of your commitment, we asked you to review a total of 5. If people are willing to review more, you can let us know, because we actually think that we may need a couple of reviewers to review 5 to 10, but we are asking every reviewer who is committed to read 5 at this time. And then the last question that's up there, just so we can make sure to resolve the questions as they come in, is about leverage, and I'm going to ask Andy to just sort of address the amount of detail you're going to be able to get on leverage.
Sure. So the question that we received is about to the extent that the applicants will be defining their leverage, and where have we in the application process defined what we're expecting around leverage. A couple of pieces to that answer. One is there's no concrete definition of leverage. Where we have talked in sort of concrete terms about what we're looking for is in that criteria. So if you look on our scoring rubric, we have some detail there around what we're thinking in terms of leverage, and that gets to sort of using our resources to unlock additional investment and build on work in the community. In terms of the application itself, as Cindy mentioned, we've tried to make this first initial application fairly low bar. So we have asked applicants to give us at a high level what leverage they anticipate, and importantly, their strategy for additional leverage. We have not asked at this phase for things like letters of intent from financial partners or concrete documentation. We will be looking for a much greater level of detail around those specifics in the next phase. What that means for now is we're really looking for both your assessment of the sophistication they brought to those conversations and the strength of their plan to secure additional resources.
You're going to see on these applications how much the entire project costs within the context of how they're using our $10 million, but it's much more descriptive than financially specific. You're also going to see some applications have 10-to-1 leverage, and it's a $100 million project, and some it's a $10 million project, and they plan to raise $200,000 additional dollars. So in their descriptions, you're going to see a pretty wide range of how people think they're using the $10 million. Christabel, I know that I cut you off, and I apologize.
No,
is there additional
not at
information
all.
you want to say?
Yes, no problem at all. That was very helpful. And of course, if you do have more questions, please continue to add them to the chat, and we'll open it up. But I did want to go over some logistics. So by the end of the day on Tuesday, September 10th, you will receive an email that'll have the link to this online platform and the login credentials. We do suggest that all of you log in and sign in as soon as possible, just so that we can make sure your credentials are working, and to also start a review to make sure that things are working properly and that you don't see any immediate issues. As Cindy mentioned, you'll have 3 weeks to complete your review, and the deadline will be 5 p.m. Central on Wednesday, October 2nd. And again, we completely understand things come up, emergencies, schedules change, so please don't hesitate to contact us at questions@chicagoprize.org if you have any issues with completing a review, if you have technical questions, if you have programmatic questions, we can field through there and respond as quickly as possible to you all. And then finally, as mentioned, the scores and feedback you provide will be very valuable to the applicants. We really appreciate as much as you can share with them, and they will be shared anonymously with the applicants in November. And on that note, if there are any other questions, Cindy, I think, and the Chicago Prize team, did we want to touch on perhaps a brief update on the types of applications we've received and what judges might expect as they review at least 5 of these submissions?
Well, we also just got another question, and so I just want to make sure to respond to people who are asking specific questions. Someone asked if they should be comparing the 5 applications to each other. Just understand that you will be seeing 5. We got 80-plus applications, so you're going to be seeing 5 of those out of 80. I don't think there's a problem, and Common Pool or Lever for Change folks can sort of push back on this. I don't think there's a problem reading all of the applications and just understanding kind of what you're seeing in your piece of this, and then going back and grading each application individually, so you just have a sense of the type of information that can be provided in the application. I don't know if you should compare each application to each other, because in some ways you're really just seeing a small subset. So if possible, again, read all of the applications if you'd like, just to give yourselves kind of that breadth of what could be coming in, and then you can take each application on its own merit if possible.
Yeah, and this is Jason. So we've built our platform so that technically you can do that. We found that a lot of judges, in fact, do like to read an application, start the process, and then maybe go on to the other one and come back and close those out once they have more context. And so this is how we've built the platform for that purpose, and you're welcome to use it for that purpose.
I'm almost embarrassed to say that I actually have a question, Jason, after watching the presentation. I noticed that we understood the 4 criteria and how they're graded and how they're summarized, but that overall impression, how do you factor that in? The one
so this is
said,
really, as Jordan said, this is really a tie-breaking function. So while it is statistically improbable in many cases that we might have a tie, that final impression score from 0 to 100 allows us to address that. It also gives our judges an opportunity to kind of think more broadly about their overall impression of the applicant. We found that judges really like this last interaction or exchange because they really like to think, okay, holistically, how would I grade an applicant like this?
Okay, thank you. We also were asked the question, which I truly appreciate, if we could read all 80, which, I appreciate the fact that everyone's time is really valuable, so I'm thrilled to see somebody might want to do that. There's two pieces of the answer to the question. First of all, if you're up for scoring more than 5, please let us know, because we definitely will give you at least up to 10, which gives you a much stronger sense of the applications. But let Andy or I know if that's something you want to do and spend your time on, and it's truly appreciated. In terms of the 80, Lever for Change is going to create a database of all of these in a summary form. So almost all of them will somehow be on in some form where you can see at least the summaries. I would also say that besides the finalists, the 4 to 6 people finalists, we also are going to have this most promising category. So we're hoping to elevate at least possibly 10, 15 ideas and really highlight them, not just summarize them, but put them out there to really highlight what's happening in communities around the city. So the answer is, at this moment in time, you're not going to be able to read 80, but ultimately you will know what the 80 ideas that came out of it are. If you want to read more than 5, we welcome that. And I think another question's come on the screen more for the normalization process, Jason, so maybe you can take that one.
Sure. Can someone relay that question to me, please?
So the question is, does the normalization overcorrect if a rater gets 5 weak applications or strong ones?
No, it does not overcorrect. So within your normal scoring range, whether you're a hard grader or an easy grader, we look to you to determine what is good versus bad. And so all this does is it pulls out what you would say is good versus bad out through a broader range of scores. It does not overcorrect. It does not undercorrect.
Does it also take into account if 5 reviewers gave low scores to the same application?
Well, once we've normalized each score, then those 5 low scores would sum to the overall aggregate score. And so it allows us to do both things. It allows us to say that if the normalized scores were low for all 5 graders, then that will score low in the overall rank. And it also allows us to say what is the definition and overall low score vis-a-vis the larger pool of judges.
Jason,
and just to give everyone confidence, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm going to suggest if somebody is not yet convinced that we're going to put them directly in touch with you, because this is what you do. This is a very strong component of Common Pool's process, and that you've done it over and over and over again. So if there
Absolutely.
are people who don't quite get it, we might put you directly in touch with them.
Yeah, and I would encourage everyone who has any questions to begin by reading our detailed explanation of our normalization process, which is published on the website and available for the public. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
So guys, I think that if no one has additional questions, we're more than happy to give you 5 minutes back on your day, and want to really thank you for logging in, listening, and of course, even more importantly, spending the time to read these applications and help us support the strong applicants and make other applications even stronger. So thank you.